Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our next episode of Silicon Global Online, which we started when we all went into lockdown 2 years ago. And we're still going strong with this show. And so thank you all for joining us over these 2 years. Really appreciate it with our new Ask a VC series. And today we have joining us Kevin Fong. I think you can see him right here in the screen. Kevin, I've known for many, many years. I think we met in Silicon Valley, or was it Beijing?
It could have been Hong Kong at one of Dan's events.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, UCJ in the way back.
Yeah, way back when. Yeah.
Way back when.
So the probably was a 2003, 2004 timeframe, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I followed Kevin ever since then in his illustrious career at Mayfield and GSR Ventures. So he helped to set up GSR Ventures back in 2014. And I've just got a little bit of a crib sheet in front of me here. You can see his bio right here. Helped the founding of GSR Ventures in Beijing and Silicon Valley in 2004.
2004.
Yeah, hard to believe it's so long ago, but there we go. But GSR Ventures is still going strong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then at Mayfield Fund, you were there and helped create all these companies with this huge enterprise value. And this huge exit acquired by HP for 2.35 billion. So in putting this together, I just realized, Kevin, you're just like an electrical engineer through and through.
Yes. Yes.
And, so you have 3 electrical engineering degrees, all great schools too, Stanford and Berkeley. So I presume you grew up in Silicon Valley?
I actually born and raised in Palo Alto.
Okay.
And my father, I'm actually a second generation entrepreneur. My father was like the 9th engineer at Hewlett Packard in 1946.
All right.
So I grew up as a Hewlett Packard family in Palo Alto.
Oh, wow. So you didn't, but you ventured really far when you helped to set up GSR Ventures in Beijing, in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. So, but for all those who are just joining us for the first time, you can find us in all of these places that are listed here on Twitter, on WeChat, on our videos on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. We have a mobile app, we have our newsletter, and we have our Circle membership. So I know many of you who joined today are Circle members, and we appreciate you joining us. So we may be moving to a membership format in the future for our shows. So if you haven't joined the Circle membership yet, you should join. Okay. And that's how you can join. Silicon Dragon Circle 2022.eventbrite. For those who don't know me already, I'm also an author and a journalist. I've written 3 books, and I have a 4th one coming up, which is with my publisher right now, being produced. It's written, but it's being produced now, so stay tuned for that. And I'm really excited about it. I was told it was my best one, so we'll see. We'll see how it does. I'll let you know more about it as we go forward. Okay, Kevin. Let's get into the heart of it, and I'm going to stop the share. And also, anyone who has a question, all you have to do is put it in the chat box, and I'm going to select the best question. So it has to be a really good question, and to make it to Kevin's ear. And so we're really happy to have Kevin here. He's a real expert in technology and venture capital, and let's see who's
so just to tell you as well, I don't know how many entrepreneurs versus VCs are there too, but having been at Mayfield Fund in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and also starting a venture fund in China, I can talk about both regions as well as sort of the inner workings of a venture capital partnership. And so whether or not you're a VC or whether or not you're a entrepreneur, I'd love to handle either questions.
Okay, good. So please put them in the chat box. There's a couple people who've already said hello to you in the chat. Hal Kalman, another great day in Palo Alto, yes. And Dan Schwartz, who said it's been a while, even though the 2 of you actually both live in Vegas. So
I know we've been all locked down like everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kevin, I mean, tell us, when was the last time you were in China?
We were just talking about that. Probably the last time I was in China, it was in 2019. And we have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, and Palo Alto. We have a fair number of people in Palo Alto and a lot of people that used to travel back and forth. So there was a little article in the end of 2019 about something happening in Wuhan. And so I had been back from China and my wife noticed it. She's a very cautious person. And in January, she said, I don't even want you going to Palo Alto with so many people in your office coming to and from China. And so in February, I don't know if you guys remember what it was like in January, February 2020, but in February, I stopped actually traveling to Palo Alto, and it was a good thing. I think in March, things started actually getting pretty crazy. So we did, as a venture fund, I mean, we have, weekly meetings with our Beijing office with Zoom calls, and something was happening there. It was crazy. So we saw that very early on, but we all stopped, traveling to China in early 2020.
Okay. Yeah, the last time I was that way was Hong Kong in January 2020. January 2020.
Yeah.
My last overseas trip was actually Israel in late February.
Oh, wow.
Other than that, I've done all roadside trips in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow.
No, it's been crazy. I hope this current pause will last more than last summer's pause, and we'll see what happens with the new variant. For those of you that don't keep track of China, China is actually going through some very serious issues right now with COVID. Now, serious is relative. As you know, Shenzhen was shut down 2 weeks ago. Shanghai has been shut down in two halves, divided by the river, and that shutdown just happened. So it's a complete shelter in place in Shanghai. And in Shanghai, they did that because there's 20,000 cases, and they're going to do mass testing. They can do 10 to 11 million tests in 1 weekend in China. So they have that capacity. So it's the Omicron virus variant is actually not being handled in China. So it's a little scary right now.
Yeah, I saw this video of a robot going down the street and enforcing the lockdown in Shanghai.
Yeah. And Hong Kong's not any better either right now. Hong Kong, they've had problems as well. They're on shutdown as well, and their hospitals are actually at overcapacity. So they're very strained. They're like where New York was in July of 2020. So yeah. Hong Kong is scary. 21 day quarantine if you travel there.
I know, it's still. So that's kind of been a downer. Is anyone here on the Zoom from Hong Kong? Who knows the latest from Hong Kong? If you are, just chime in a little bit later. Okay. So we usually do have a pretty global audience for this program. So Hong Kong and Silicon Valley and New York and sometimes London. Okay. Well, good. So let me, okay. Robin Wan from Best Hong Kong says it's now a 7-day quarantine in.
Oh, good.
Leo Tan said Hong Kong has been improved a lot. Moved from Hong Kong in July of 2020. Quarantine is now down to 7 days. Okay. Well, that's good.
That is good.
The problem there is the older people didn't get vaccinated.
Yeah.
From what I heard.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that it's doing better.
Yeah. So, okay. So Kevin, I mean, what led you to get behind GSR Ventures and help them set up and be really instrumental in GSR Ventures setting up? And what was it about it that fascinated you and made you want to do this?
Sure. So, going back to 2002, 2003, if you remember, Silicon Valley at that time frame, we were just coming out of the internet and telecom bubble burst of 99 or 2000, 2001. And we were sitting around Silicon Valley, Mayfield Fund, where I was managing partner at the time, was, like all the other Silicon, Sand Hill Road VCs, was wondering, what's next? What's going to happen next?
Mhm.
And due to the fact that we had an investment in a cellular base station company that did business in China,
Mhm.
we noticed, the rise of the internet in terms of internet users, the rise of mobile, the use of SMS and texting, and that was really just starting to come to fore. So it wasn't going to be very long in my estimation that internet usage in China was going to exceed that of the U.S. That a lot of the internet companies that had been successful in the first internet 1.0 were going to go to China and make their effort. And so we actually looked at two areas. We looked at India and China.
Oh,
And my co-managing partner at the time was Yogan Dalal, who's Indian. And so we sort of split the world in terms of looking beyond Silicon Valley. And we looked at semiconductor consumption and saw China doing that. So I said, hey, I should investigate this further. So using my contacts, I traveled to China in 2003 and 2004 and met a lot of the key, both, political leaders, business leaders, and companies. Just to give you an example, Tencent, when I visited them in Hong Kong, I visited their computer room and they were about to do $20 million in sales. And
oh my God.
yeah, and their computer room was just a storage room with a bunch of white box servers there, and that was their server room. And I asked if I could invest, and they said no, we're profitable already. Yeah, they were making $20 million in revenue and $10 million in profit at the time. So they said we don't need any money. But I visited Huawei at the time, which was an impressive company, and so I went back to my partners and I said, hey, look, there's a number of things going on in China. They were talking about RMB and not benching and letting it float freely. That Olympics were coming up in 2008.
Yeah.
And then all these other factors about internet usage and semiconductor consumption and things like that, and mobile phone growth. And I said, this is going to be exciting. There's no early stage VCs in China. And I said, we should do something about that. And at the same time, I met with Richard Lim and James Ding, who were the founding partners, managing directors of GSR Ventures. And they were looking to start a venture fund to do exactly the same thing. So it was serendipity that actually happened. And so Mayfield, I housed GSR Ventures in Mayfield's offices for the first year, loaned them $1 million for expenses, and helped them raise money from our limited partners to raise GSR 1, which we closed in 2004 at a $75 million. So the rest has been history. GSR manages $3.5 billion in capital now, and has a number of great, marquee names that they've invested in, including Didi, Xiaohongshu. The list goes on and on actually. But so it's been a lot of great fun. And in 2008, I left Mayfield Fund and joined GSR full time. So the rest is history, I guess. We're now on our 8th fund. We're just starting investing our eighth fund.
How large is that?
Our 8th fund is actually smaller. It's about $350 million. I think that two things are happening in China right now. The Chinese capital markets and the Chinese pace of funding has slowed since last year. COVID is going to, due to both its economy as well as the fact that I think we've got a second round of COVID effects happening in China. China skipped the first round of COVID effects, but I think this round is proving to be a little more problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing too is that the tensions between the U.S. and China have also increased as well, and so we've had to negotiate that, very carefully. I'm still very bullish on China. It might have to be a bifurcated strategy instead of a unified strategy, but we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a very, even today, and as it has been for the last 4 years, a very dynamic situation with respect to U.S. and China relations.
Oh, absolutely. So what are you seeing today that's exciting technology-wise in Silicon Valley and in China?
Well, I think it's interesting there. When we first started in 2004, I would say 2004 through 2012, to maybe put a not so flatteringly, but it was all about internet arbitrage. I mean, when you saw an idea here, you know, by the next year or 2 years later, you saw an equivalent, but adapted obviously to the China market. You know, a company there. So Didi was essentially started first before Uber went to China. Meituan was a delivery company and a food delivery company that started. And so we played that game for a while. And in fact, it was also fueled by the fact that there was this human bridge, you know, of brain power that was going from literally Stanford Business School back to China. And, you know, Rebecca, in your books, you know, you interviewed a number of those guys.
Yeah.
They all have Stanford MBA pedigrees, and they all went back and saw this great opportunity. And so we've certainly were the beneficiaries in terms of investments. But let's fast forward to today. Today, it's a little more even in terms of what's being invested in. I think e-commerce and consumer internet are definitely on the mature and back burner side. There's always interesting things that might happen. Crypto is and fintech is in China and in the US. You know, they both have very different meanings due to the regulatory differences between the US and China. Health tech is also, and med tech is a big deal here in the US and in China. You know, some people throw Peloton in that same category of sort of, but basically it's how you bring health and wellness to people remotely. So we're big believers here in the U.S. of digital health, maybe even digital therapeutics, and in China we're seeing similar things happening as well. So those are big. So health is a big area. Robotics in both countries is also very exciting, all the way from autonomous vehicles to, you know, we have robotics that work in warehouses and manufacturing floors, and those are popular in both worlds. AI tech, whether it's semiconductor based, there's a slew of semiconductor companies we've funded in China and here. That's not our bread and butter, but we've had some successes there. And then also after all these years, I mean, we thought this was going to happen earlier, but enterprise software, SaaS companies and cloud companies in China are starting to rise as well. There's not a lot there quite yet. Obviously in the US, there's been a ton, but I think China is going to have some interesting things there as well. And we've made a number of investments in the cloud and SaaS area. So pretty exciting. I mean, it's nothing is slowing down. I mean, valuations in the US and China may have changed for cloud and SaaS companies, but there's still a lot of, you know, I would call it normalizing actually, because I think they got a little bit heady in China and here. And I think they're a little more down to earth, but they're still very real companies.
Okay, so what are some examples of some of these companies that you've invested in recently, particularly in this enterprise area that you're talking about?
Well, I'd say there's two. Let me start with the health tech area. There's a company here that we've invested in called Vetable, and they do something called decentralized testing. So it's really interesting in the pharmaceutical and the medical testing area. If you wanted to test a new pharmaceutical and things like that, it was a very manual, face-to-face driven process. And obviously COVID, whether it's seeking out the vaccine for COVID or whether it was for other things, you know, those ground to a halt. And we'd invested in Vetable before COVID, and it started before that because we thought decentralized testing, the acronym is DCT for the medical world, but they do everything as you would expect, as you and I, for those of us from the consumer internet world, you know, you take an app, you have a doctor's visit through video and things like that. And so this company has gone to $100 million in ARR in no time, and is growing explosively. And so that's an example that I would call sort of digital healthcare. Basically, that's exciting. The example on the enterprise side is that we have companies doing in the US doing essentially cloud management, so enabling you to do AWS cloud services on premises-based equipment. A lot of people still have a lot of data centers on the premises. They also have a lot of AWS services, and this company called Nebulon allows you to treat your internal cloud the same way that you would AWS. All the great services you have at AWS in terms of agility, management, scalability, are managed through the cloud, except with your premises equipment. So that's an exciting company. In China, we have everything from storage companies to develop, DevOps companies doing DevOps software. Those companies are doing quite well in China, so it's exciting to see both fronts. And I would say, different areas just due to the different market requirements. But I would say now China is pretty much on this. At least startups are on the same time frame now as the U.S. There's not that lag that there used to be.
I see. Is there still an opportunity for a Stanford MBA grad to go over to China and do a startup, or is that time past?
No, that's absolutely. I think, for good people, whether they're entrepreneurs, management types, or R&D types, both sides of the ocean have great opportunity. If you have a network in China and you speak fluent Chinese, the opportunities in China are still there. Absolutely. So there is, I'd still encourage students that want to return to China to start companies there and called GSR Ventures.
Okay.
We're open for business.
Okay, there's a Stanford MBA alum on the call. So there you go, Joyce. There's your answer. And how do you spell the? Did you get back to how with the spelling of that first company you mentioned? How do you spell that?
No, which one you mean? Medable?
I think it was, yeah.
What did he ask? Hold on, I didn't see that.
Yes, he says yes. That's the company.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So it's Medable. It's MEADABLE.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So hold on a second. I've got to change who I can chat to everyone. There we go.
There we go. Now everybody is enlightened.
Yeah.
So on the whole U.S.-China tech issues and all the conflicts that have been going on, how is GSR Ventures navigating that? What's your strategy for that?
Well, so there's a couple of things. As much as, is everybody familiar with the term CFIUS, Committee for Foreign Investment in U.S. Companies, CIFIUS? So
lots of people are saying yes.
Yeah, so CFIUS was a little opaque. It still is opaque, but it was a lot more opaque 3 years ago. It's actually gotten more involved in investing in both technology transfer as well as investment by foreign companies in U.S. companies. That has, I can't deny that. I mean, it's had a damper on 3 years ago. A lot of companies, whether it's Tencent or Alibaba, made a lot of investments in the U.S. I had a company that was in the autonomous vehicle, the AV driving space, called DeepMap, that Ali made an investment in. And in China, obviously, we have a lot of companies where there's investments in them. Most recently, actually, Tencent has an investment in a company that it's called CB. It's a 7-Eleven 7-Eleven competitor. Is actually doing quite well.
Okay.
And for those of you that have been in Beijing and Shanghai or all over China, there's over 500 stores there. But so they continue to make investments in Chinese companies. The investments in U.S. companies have stopped. The potential acquisitions by Chinese companies have stopped. And it's looking like a bifurcated world where we have U.S. investments and Chinese investments. Now, we have one company that's doing a next generation GPS semiconductor, GPS is not considered for consumer GPS, meaning in your phone and your watch and things like that, is not considered a covered technology. And in fact, there's a lot of US companies that sell into China for GPS chips. In fact, almost all of the GPS chips, the majority of GPS chips for cell phones come from US companies, Qualcomm, et cetera. So we have a company that is based in the US and is, we fully intend and are talking with Chinese customers. And so in something like that, that's not going to be a problem. There are some industries that are considered covered, and that's a very specific term, where you will be limited to what you can sell. So it depends on the situations. Most of the SaaS companies have none of those issues at all. There are issues that you have to pay attention to, and I think that's what GSR, quite frankly, sort of thumping our chest a little bit, understanding how a U.S. company can go to China and sell, and vice versa, we understand very well. So it has changed. You have to walk around some landmines, but you can navigate those, and you can navigate those quite legally. And in fact, the growth of CFIUS and the attention that's paid by CFIUS actually makes it better because it's more well-defined. There's a process now, just like going public, getting a CFIUS review is a very specific thing now. So, selling companies based in each country selling across the ocean is something that's definitely feasible, unless you happen to be in one of the areas that's a sensitive area.
Mm-hmm. What about the possible delistings of some of the Chinese companies from NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange?
So there's a lot of things going on there. The Chinese have, and I'm not an expert, but I'm an educated observer. The Chinese government has, I think, reacted a little too fast on their crackdown of technology companies. I think all governments, US, EU, and China, are a little bit worried about how much power some of these big tech companies have, whether it's Ali and Tencent on one side, or whether it's Google and Facebook and Apple on the US and EU side. So all of the governments are sort of trying to figure out how to rein them in. And I think, the dialogue here is exactly the same as it is in China in terms of, how much power they have and things like that. In China, there's a very simple one I'll give, which is Alipay. Alipay is one of the biggest, electronic or e-wallet things. Now they have so much information on consumers in China that they're better than any credit agency, even better than the Chinese government in terms of understanding someone's credit worthiness, which, by the way, can translate into lots of money because you can make money off that the more information you have. So a big issue for both sides of the ocean. And I'd say there's not just, you have EU, you have the US, you have China, you probably have Japan, and you probably have Korea the same way. There's this term I've coined called data nationality, where people are highly sensitive about their citizens their citizens' data and who has access to it and how it's controlled. There's a rule in China where if you have financial information about any Chinese consumer, that data cannot leave the shores of China. The EU has data privacy laws. The US is talking about the same kinds of things, more specifically California as well. So there is going to be this era, which means technology is going to have to solve it, about how you operate a cloud-based service or a consumer service or a fintech service. Oh, I forgot fintech too on both sides, which are having big, but how do you do that with the data and keeping that data, safe within the shores of whatever jurisdiction you're in? And so that is not an easily solved technology problem. And so, that's a consideration that you have if you want to operate in all worlds.
Sure. Data nationality. Okay.
Yeah. Data nationalism.
Yeah. Interesting. So Joyce has a question about Edtech in China, which we know went through its own turmoil.
Yeah. We have some investments in private companies that have been hit fairly hard by that, all the way from music, piano tutoring lessons to teaching English and things like that. And that debate is not complete in China for the time being. It looks really bad. If the current status of the laws for Edtech in China are really bad. And for those of you that don't know, the Chinese government perspective on tutoring and education is that since it costs money for the most part, the Chinese government is trying to equalize the access to education by all citizens. And if you are able to afford, Kumon math here or online Edtech in China, you have an advantage due to your ability to pay to better your children's education. China wants to find a way to equalize that. And they know they've gone too far. Well, I say that with too much certainty. I mean, I can't say anything with certainty. I believe they think they've gone too far, but they're trying to navigate a way that doesn't give less, ability to pay people or access to, or lower income people access to, the fine tools. So, does it mean that potentially services are free and you make money other ways? I don't know. Those are nobody's given up on EdTech, but people are trying to figure out how to solve this problem and make it more available to everybody and not make it a game of I've got more money so I can see to my kids' education.
Right.
But that's how we see it. We think it's going to turn around and change, but it is in a period of sort of stasis right now.
Mm. So given the crackdown in China, are you seeing more companies looking to Southeast Asia or even back to the US?
Well, it's problematic for Chinese companies to come to the US because of the current situation. I would say Southeast Asia is yes, but I think there's a lot of things about Southeast Asia that Chinese companies don't understand. I think you've seen a number of competitors in those countries, whether it's Indonesia, Korea, or whatever, whether it's gaming or whether it's delivery services or things like that, or micro mobility, that have done quite well. Some of these are being started by Chinese entrepreneurs that are going to those countries, and GSR has followed and made some investments in those areas. In the area of fintech, and in fintech, it's micro lending and things like that, or consumer lending. We have a micro mobility investment in a company in Singapore, but even though it's based in Singapore, their markets are all over North America and Europe. So we are actually, in the sense that is GSR investing in more companies in Southeast Asia? The answer is yes. If the question is about Chinese companies moving into those areas, I think they want to, but there has been a lot of stumbling on it. I think the game companies have been the most obvious. Tencent's had a terrible time trying to adapt to the Southeast Asian market.
Oh, with their games. Yeah.
Yes, with their games. Yeah, with their games.
It tends to be a localized market.
Yeah, and it's more than that too. It's managing growth. It's growth hacking and stuff like that. It's different for those countries, and what they know in China doesn't necessarily apply in Indonesia or
right.
Or Korea.
So when you were at Mayfield, you said they were looking at both China and India, and then I'm just curious. Well, so the China part of it ended up being basically GSR Ventures, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then the Mayfield India, it has separate.
Has stayed, yeah. I'd say in venture capital in India, again, I'm not the expert there, but the venture capital in India is very different. At the time in the early 2000s, early stage venture capital was non-existent in India. Non-existent is too strong a word. It was not as big a deal. And that ecosystem, even though there's lots of great entrepreneurs there, the ecosystem around it just wasn't there. It wasn't supportive and things like that. I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah.
And so India is quite exciting. And so Mayfield India has chosen to, align itself with India. Maybe that has to do with the fact that most of the managing partners at Mayfield now are Indian.
Okay. Well, there's so many unicorns now in India.
There are. So India, I think, is now we're talking about, 20 years after the fact. I think India is definitely, caught up. There's still lots of issues with India with respect to, cell phone penetration and things like that. average income and disposable income and things like that, but it's definitely on its way. I mean, back in 2003, when we were looking at India, we saw no reason why it shouldn't be that way, but it has taken longer.
It's taken longer, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you see today in terms of valuations on venture deals? I was just listening to Bloomberg Technology, and they were talking about how Tiger Global is just running up the valuations of everything because they come in at the at a pre-IPO stage, and they have a lot of money.
So that's old news now. Tiger and SoftBank are actually, and all of that group are rethinking their valuations. There are even some deals that we've seen where they've come back, where they might have signed a term sheet but are renegotiating valuations. It depends on the sector, of course, but it's all tied to the fact that Chinese valuations, went from 50 times PE to forward revenues to now maybe 20 to 30, and in the U.S. the same thing happened this year. So if you look at the newly public companies from 2021 in the U.S., especially in the cloud and the SaaS space, they've come down quite a bit, and they were at 40 and 50 times next 12 months revenue, and they've come down to more like 30 and 20 and things like that. So those investors like Tiger, who are still have a lot of dry powder to invest, are I think they're going to be very active still, but I think the valuations for a lot of companies have come down, and that affects that, that ripples down. I mean, they were looking mostly at later stage investing, but there we go. So Hal, just thank you for the metric. 2021 US IPOs are down 40% on average. So that does say it all. Valuations are definitely, coming down both in China and the US.
Yeah. Does that also mean that venture capital fund sizes will come down?
So there was a lot of fundraising in end of last year, and it's continued. I mean, you see some of the bigger funds get bigger. Now they're not all early stage. They're now multi-stage as well. They have late stage. In some cases, they have hedge funds, and then they have seed stage as well. So it's definitely a lot of money is still out there. Let's put it that way in the venture stage. The question is it going to be smartly invested, over the next year or not?
Throughout your career, you've stayed interested in the early stage technology companies.
It's true. I've always, I've always liked that phase of life, and I always like nurturing, even to this day. Where I'm less active, but I still like nurturing new teams. It's just exciting. And I think the entrepreneurs of today are much more highly educated than they were 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, there's the internet, there's more news, there's more people doing it. I mean, when I started in venture capital in 1988, a lot of people, when I told them I was a venture capitalist, had no idea what I did. I mean, they go, "Oh, it's a venture capitalist," and I say, "Oh, I do high tech and early stage investing," and they kind of shake their head and say, "Okay." And it was very tech oriented. It's really started changing with Internet 1.0. I mean, one of my signs that I knew the internet bubble was going to burst in 2000 was when taxi cab drivers or my barber would ask me for stock tips about IPOs and stuff like that. Oh, really? It was like crazy. And then I went to a high school economics class, and one of the students there asked me about participating preferred, and it's like, okay, now that was in Silicon Valley, so maybe that was not unusual, but it was strange. Now I think ever since the first internet. And now with social media, in 2004 with Facebook, it just, added another one. Now everybody's a venture capitalist. So right. I don't have to explain to anybody what I do anymore.
Yeah. Sand Hill Road. People even know what that means. Sand Hill
Road. Yeah. And it's funny now. A lot of people have moved to Sand Hill Road now.
Yeah, right. Vegas seems to be a good place. Miami's another good place.
Miami. Yeah.
Seattle,
Austin, New York.
New
New
York,
York is number two. New York is number two behind Silicon Valley now
yeah,
in terms of
then
number of deals
Austin.
done.
Yeah, then, yeah. Okay, so someone has a comment about Didi. Didi, kind of the Uber in China, right? Suffered the
Yes.
wrath of the Chinese government by insisting to go public on NASDAQ. That was really bad timing for them, right?
It was, and honestly, I think Didi didn't handle it very well either. I mean, if you remember their first, they just, I mean, I probably can't say too much because there's, any of these things, there's litigation. So there's two parts to the question about Chinese companies listing on NASDAQ or NYSE. NASDAQ and NYSE still continues to be the most desirable and most fluid, the markets with the most liquidity and world attention. And so we have Chinese companies that are still looking to list on NASDAQ or NYSE. They may or may not be able to, but but it's becoming more clear as to what caused the Chinese government to give those companies problems, and it has to do with data. And this thing, I'll go back to data nationalism again. Anybody, whether it's the EU, these are the biggest examples. The EU, the US, and China are all questioning companies that have, literally 100 million points of data on individuals using their service. One of the most, that people might be familiar with in the US was the case of Grindr. Grindr had a fairly large population, but it was a unique population of people, and it was bought by a Chinese media company. And a lot of people in the US government, CFIUS included, said, hey, we don't like the idea of a Chinese company knowing who all the participants on Grindr are. And so they caused that deal to be unwound. Likewise, Didi had something very similar as well. The Chinese government was worried about a US listed Chinese company and what would happen to Didi's information. Think about the information Didi has. They have literally millions of users and their ride behaviors in China. And who has access to that information? And if you're a US listed company, on the other side of the equation were the US auditors who wanted to be able to see through a Chinese company's books and be able to do audits on those, which they previously haven't had a lot of transparency to. So this is our very current issues. Didi went right in the wind and right in the face of those questions being raised. They already were public in the US. And so unfortunately, these issues got raised without any good solutions to them. And like any government, I think they overreached what they intended to do. I don't think, honestly, they really wanted to hurt Didi that much, but they did have real issues about data control and auditing and things like that. And the US side also has the same issue. So there's a couple of things that are happening now to sort of change that. Not changed yet. So these issues are still going to be there about Chinese companies wanting to list. Number one, that NYSE and NASDAQ wants to be able to have full transparency of audits, not from a privacy standpoint, but just from a pure financial standpoint. And as we speak, the Chinese government and financial regulators, as well as the SEC, are absolutely negotiating right now in actually mutual. I'm not just saying that to be all nice, but I think everybody has mutual benefits for the capital markets to be open. And they're trying to figure out, in a very complex situation, how to make that work. The issues about data are another one. And what some of our companies are thinking about is creating a separate company that houses the data.
Oh, really?
And that company stays under complete Chinese control. If it's a Chinese company, the Chinese company can go public, but then the data is kept safe by this other company, which is not even an arm's length company. It's a separate company that won't go public, but has a contract with the main company. So you can satisfy the issues about, who has access to the data.
Right.
On the flip side of the coin, if you're a US company and you're operating in China, the Chinese government has an ability to come into a data center and say, hey, I want to see this data. And, you can't prevent that. So this data nationalism, again, I think is a very real thing. I don't think this is a one-upsmanship. I don't think it's us versus them on any side. I think there's some real strategic questions about who has access to data and when. And so companies are going to have to formulate, if they have large amounts of personalized data, figure out how do they keep it safe, in the jurisdiction that they choose to operate. So,
Right.
So I think that's possible, but it's going to take time.
So you're making me think of TikTok and the separate company, its lookalike in Beijing, where TikTok was basically spun out of that as a
Yes,
separate US company. So that was another
another way to,
thing.
yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think TikTok still bothers some governments, but I think right now people are a little bit satisfied. There's going to be some shit. I think most companies only care about metadata, not personalized data. So anonymized data and things like that. And so how you still get the same things that you can in order to make money off that data or gain insight to give better products to that data without actually personalizing it and things like that. So I know someone else also
They want to
talked
know about
about,
crypto also.
yes, crypto mining as well as
Yeah.
P2P. So on P2P lending, I don't see how that's going to be successful in China. The Chinese government's perspective that I understand is a little bit like what the FTC does here with respect to predatory lending. And I'll give another example in the US that people might be familiar with. People are worried about buy now, pay later, BNPL companies like Affirm and other companies like that, or Klarna. It's a great service, and obviously there's been a lot of demand for it. Those companies have done very well. However, what the FTC and the Chinese government share in common is that they don't want that to become predatory lending. Think of payday loans, for example. Payday loans are right on the gray edge of being predatory versus providing a real service to lower income wage earners. And I think the Chinese government, when it comes to P2P, is worried about fraud, is worried about predatory lending. And so P2P lending, which is sort of outside a controlled financial system, is a no-no for them. Crypto has many of the same concerns. How do you control it? The Chinese government does not like anything that they don't control. I think the US is fighting with how much control versus not control to have as well. You couldn't have the financial, you don't have, I mean, this is bigger about world events and things like that. But obviously the sanctions that have been put on Russia, if you do that to the banking system, which is, dollar denominated, but crypto was large, how would you actually be able to control that? Now, world people are also, financial markets are asking, well, everything's dollar based. Does that mean the US really controls the world because they can shut off SWIFT or central banks or whatever? And I think that, so,
Right.
it's, that's a bigger issue.
That's right. So now we want to get to the metaverse, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
So Web 3.0. Is everyone ready for Web 3.0 in the metaverse? And can anyone explain it? So let me get to my poll. This is just a little prelude to the poll that we have, which is kind of fun. It's totally anonymous as well. So, okay, so we will focus on the metaverse here in the poll. And what's your view of the metaverse? And Kevin, I know you can't see this yourself, but you can chime in and talk about what's your view of the metaverse.
Yeah, so actually the polls come up for me too.
Oh, it did? Okay, what's your view of the metaverse? Positive, negative, or neutral?
So I'm going to say positive.
Okay.
But like anything new, it's overhyped like crazy. And
Okay.
and so I think there is a metaverse. I don't know what it looks like quite yet, but the concept of a metaverse, I believe in. There are some things here that I believe. Oh, you know what? I can see the poll, but I can't respond.
Oh, I see. So 62% are positive about it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair number.
Yeah. So I'm actually writing an article right now for CNBC on the metaverse. So this is part of my research now.
Sure.
Yeah. So okay, which company will lead the metaverse? Okay. Now there's a couple of choices here, and I know that this is kind of a skimpy list, but I didn't want. We also have the other categories. So there's Facebook, there's Tencent, there's Microsoft, there's a whole bunch of companies, Adobe, Atari, gaming companies, crypto companies, blockchain companies, but which company is going to lead it? So, okay.
My answer would be other. I don't believe.
Who's your other then?
Other is yet to be determined. It could be NVIDIA. It could be, yeah.
The chip company, right? The chip company.
Yeah, the chip company. I don't think, it could be a gaming company, and I don't think it would be Tencent. I don't think the
Sandbox.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the incumbents necessarily have a lock on it.
Oh, really? Okay. Can I quote you on that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm taking notes. All right. Now, are you traveling again for business? And wow.
Yeah. I would say cautiously, and so the answer would have to be yes, but definitely I'm watching the numbers. I think I told you in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is based, we're down to the 7-day moving average of being 100 cases per day. Now, obviously, not all cases are being, but I'm watching the numbers. If the numbers continue to go down, I'll start traveling again. But if the numbers start going up again, I'll say no. And right now in Santa Clara County, the numbers are low too. They're about 100 and something like that. By the way, I look at the numbers I use. I use the New York Times has you can get by county and by state numbers and things like that. So I probably use them.
All right. Well, that's good to know. So it's about half and half. 41% said they're traveling again, and 59% said they're not.
Yeah. So
we're leaning toward no traveling yet for business.
Yeah. So
which is
April 18th.
Interesting, actually.
It is. I think it's a lot of personal choice. April 18th.
Personal choice.
The FAA is going to drop mask mandates on planes.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that's the current plan, which means in airports and on planes and public transportation, you won't have to wear a mask. It's not required. So I don't know how that will change people's answers. I would wear a mask on a plane still.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was in a taxi going to JFK. I think it was yesterday morning, and I was upset that the taxi driver was not wearing a mask. So I don't know. I didn't think that's right. So
yeah.
Anyhow, that was fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so now let's get to our next part of the show, and I'm going to stop the share actually. So give me a second to do that. And anyone who has an additional question for Kevin, please chime in now. And while I'm talking and telling you about our next show, which is April 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and it's April 27th Hong Kong time in the morning. And we live in a split world, but Silicon Valley is a good place to live in a split world. You can sign up for the program Hong Kong Restart 2022. It's online already and ready for your sign up. So hopefully you'll join us for that and join us for our other events that we still have coming out throughout the year. Okay, now, Kevin, any final comments from you?
Wow. this year and the last 2.5 years have been, black swan events with respect to the pandemic and things like that, something that's really changed the course of everyone.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the events of February 24th and the Russian invasion of Ukraine is also going to change world events for now on. And, I'm not going to predict about what's going to happen, but it's a scarier time.
Yeah.
I remember growing up in the 60s, there used to be, the scientists used to have a nuclear doomsday clock, and it talked about how many minutes before midnight we were. And that minute hand went up and down depending on tensions in the world and things like that. And during the 90s, for those of you that, were born in the 80s and the 90s, you guys have not known a Cold War. I mean, since the Cold War ended in 91 with the breakup of the Soviet Union, nuclear winter and a Holocaust wasn't a possibility. Nuclear bombs continued to be a problem, a la North Korea and stuff like that, or terrorism or something like that, but not a situation where you had mutually assured destruction. Yeah. I think that we are back in a time where those things are a possibility again. And I think there's a whole generation of people that haven't really thought about how to live and operate in a world where, it could end if there's a mistake. Someone said black swan events bring opportunity for arbitrage. I think that's a very true statement. So in terms of great unrest, there's a lot of opportunities if you happen to have a view of how the world is going to turn out. I'm an optimist. So I think everything's going to work out fine, but it's obviously concerning when the world can change, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's Russia, and can change the course of events. I only hope that it's not going to be a Soviet Union versus US, but there's going to be three powers in the world with China. Having traveled and worked extensively in China, I'm very optimistic about the pragmatism of the Chinese government. We may not like some of their human rights issues or what the government, how the government operates in terms of being centralized, but I think I think people in the world are going to have to figure out how to accept different forms of government that happen to be working for their populations. And you could argue whether or not for China it's working for them. I would say it is. And I also think we're going through a period of time where US exceptionalism is going to have to be thought of differently, and how to share the world stage. And that's not going to feel comfortable to the US. There's a book called it's called The Post-US World or something like that. It was a TED Book Club selection, sort of a post-US world. And I think things like that, how the US comports itself in a different world where there's two other superpowers or two other large powers, is going to be interesting. And how much is the US going to learn how to play nice and share? I don't know. I'm optimistic. I think we're a very resilient country, and I do like. I don't know if people saw what Elon Musk had to say, but he did say something which I think was pretty poignant, and he can say some pretty crazy things. He said basically that the leaders of the countries should be within 10 to 20 years of the age of the mean of the population, meaning that a lot of people in power right now are way too old compared to the populations they're trying to lead. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think that's a thought-provoking statement.
It is.
Talks about youth and leadership, and is it a good thing that you have 70 and 80-year-olds ruling the government? That I feel bad learning more about crypto at my age, and I'm 68. So I can't imagine 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds, how do they think about phones and apps and stuff like that? I mean, it's just crazy. So again, I think,
there is a real digital divide with age.
yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's
And
not
so,
only
and also I
geographic.
think our and the world leaders too are separated from that. They're not allowed, supposed to be, they're not allowed to have their own phones. They don't know how to,
Uh-huh.
people and social media works. I mean, they're too protected. I
Yeah.
mean, so they don't, do they have the proper perspective of the world and stuff? I don't know. These are
Yeah.
interesting questions. I am not disheartened by any of this.
Well, the leader of Ukraine is he's younger.
He definitely is, and he's showing it as well.
Yeah, he is. He's a real social media hound. He's really good at it.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
I liked Hal's comments.
Thomas
He goes,
says you're never
he
too
says
old.
you're never too old, which I agree with. It's all about, it's all about perspective. So
it is. Kevin, that was very well put. Thank you for those closing remarks. I really enjoyed them, and I think everybody else did too.
Yeah.
So
glad to do
round
that.
of applause for Kevin, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. And
Yep.
For those who would like to listen to it again, it will be on YouTube next week.
Yeah.
So, the reason is because we'd like to encourage people to come to the show and ask their question during the show.
I did post my email on the chat, so hopefully everybody got it. And I'm also on LinkedIn,
Yes.
so people can reach me through there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
All right.
It's been too long since we talked, and appreciate your support through all the years, and keep going. You're doing good stuff. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Goodbye.